So basically, anytime I'm talking about Candace Owens, who's a fraud, by the way, I always cite the climate change debate that she got into with Joe Rogan when she made her appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast. And I have a feeling, by the way, that she's not going to come back on the Rogan podcast. I'd be surprised if she did. I really would be shocked because I think Joe Rogan, and especially what we saw with what Joe Rogan said to Dave Rubin, where he was like, you sure you watched the podcast? And he goes, were you high? When the idea was presented of Candace Owens running for Senate, it was pretty hilarious. But anyways, basically here, she's going to expose herself as the dumbest person to ever exist, ever, except for Jesse Lee Peterson. But now, the dumbest conservative pundit award that I used to, have was, they used to always go out to Tomi Lahren. I used to always think she was the dumbest. And there was a point where I thought that they were in equal standing or close. But as soon as I had heard this, which was the day it came out, I had immediately figured out that this was the dumbest, forget conservative, any pundit whatsoever. So check out this fiasco, and we're going to come back and talk about it.
A bunch of different scientists and see how they gather data and see what they understand about CO2 levels and what's the danger of them and what can combat it and what could not. Have you done all this, or do you take this flippant opinion based on the party line?
This wouldn't be the hill I died on, right? But it's not about the party. I just genuinely, I've read a ton about it, but I would not be able to come to you and say, like, this is my strong opinion. But here's like the easiest way to say this, right?
Okay.
The fact that there is a disparity in the science community about whether or not it's real is enough to.
It's very little.
Yep.
Very little disparity. Most scientists, the vast majority, agree that human beings are negatively affecting climate change.
Yeah.
The vast majority.
Yeah, I just don't think so.
So you think that the very few scientists that disagree with the consensus are the ones that are correct?
Well, I think if something is it's either subjective or it's objective, and there are objective truths, right? But it's subjective if you're saying that there are some, and I don't think there's very little. There are some that don't get paid to go on TV. There's some that are not Bill Nye, who are not funded scientists, and that has been a whole.
Well, Bill Nye's not a scientist.
I know.
He's not. He's
it broke my heart when I found out.
Science
mouthpiece.
Propagandist.
Yeah, but that's the point.
He's no, that's not a good word.
I don't think Al Gore is a scientist.
He's not.
Right.
But Bill Nye is like a science influencer or a science entertainer.
Yeah, he's like
But he doesn't have a background in actual science. He's not a scientist. He doesn't have a PhD. He's got an
I learned about him in school. Like, everything I did in science had to do with Bill Nye.
Well, he promotes science, and science is not bad.
Yeah.
But the real problem is with climate change is that, for sure, there has been ups and downs throughout the history of this planet. They're observable. They follow them in. I mean, it was one of the subjects that I had earlier today with Dr. Robert Schoch. In 2014, the vast majority, 87% of scientists, said that human activity is driving global warming, yet only half the American public ascribe to that view. So,
well, what website is
87%, and this is
Scientific American.
Yeah.
Yeah, .com though, like, 'cause that means it's making money. I don't trust that. If it was a .org, I would probably take that. But this is just a random website, and I don't
Scientific
trust
American is not necessarily a random website.
I don't believe this like at all. Just so you know.
You don't believe it at all?
I genuinely don't believe it. I know you do, but I genuinely don't believe it.
I believe most of the time the consensus of scientists that are studying the data.
Right.
And so what they're doing is
But do you remember all of the stories that came out about the scientists that said that when they tried to present their evidence to show, like, they were basically just getting shut down at every corner? You can pull that up too. Like, scientists who look up the opposite. Right? Instead of looking for what you're searching for, looking for what you're not looking for.
I didn't search for it. That's what I found when I searched it.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But look up.
But this is my question. Yeah. Why are you so sure? This is
because what you just said. Because what you just said.
This is an extremely complicated subject.
And it is. I said I am not so sure that I would die on the hill for it. Mm-hmm. My opinion right now, and is just that it was a means, because forget the fact of whether you believe global warming is real. Let's say it's 100% real. Let's say we know for a fact it's real. Is there a way?
Well, let's be clear.
Yeah.
Global warming, climate change is definitely real. It's happening.
Well,
the question
but
is
it's
why
always
has it happened?
happened.
Yes, it has always happened.
So what is this is the
real-
climate change? Yes, the climate changes. It was different weather yesterday than it was today. The climate is forever changing. Like that's the problem, is that people are making it seem like that's something weird.
No,
it's not
that's
unique.
not. You're misrepresenting the issue. The issue is people think that human beings are exacerbating climate change to the point where there's a tipping point. We cross over that tipping point. We're going to deal with huge problems that could be corrected if we act now and put a lot of funding into climate control.
Okay.
And this is what Howard Bloom was on talking about a few days ago. He was talking about that the real future involves the technology of climate control, and that what we have to be really careful of is letting it get too far where you can't ever stop it and pull it back. This is what scientists are warning about. This is why they want emission standards. This is why they want to figure out how to get people to be aware of the fact that this is a real issue.
Okay.
Now, irregardless, human beings, if they never existed, the Earth has constantly gone through cycles. The question is not whether or not the Earth has gone through cycles of cooling and warming.
Right.
The question is, are we exacerbating that? The vast majority of scientists say we are.
Okay.
Now, this could negatively impact all sorts of coastal cities. This could be a gigantic problem. This is not like propaganda that's drummed up by some sort of big business that seeks to make money off of this, or some sort of a
Well, they were making
organization.
money off of it.
Al Gore might have made some money off
No,
of
but
it.
like
Who's making money
the
off
agreement
of
that we were in, they were that was like the amount of money that America was losing. But here's what I was going to ask you. So let's just
Wait a minute, the amount of money America was losing? Who was
in
America?
the Paris Agreement. This is the reason why we
Okay.
wanted to get out of the Paris Agreement.
Is,
but that's what I wanted to get to.
there's
So let's say we all
arguments about
agree
the
that
Paris
global
Agreement.
warming is real. I don't believe it's real. Okay, so I can't
But why?
sit here.
But
I
here's the
can't.
question.
I can't.
But why have a belief?
What do you mean?
Why have a belief as to whether or not global warming is real or not real?
Because
if
I
you
just
don't
I
have
just
a
find that
background
when
in
things
it, you don't
you're
understand
correct.
the science.
You are correct.
But why have a belief in it?
Right. So it's not a belief. It's not a belief in it. I don't believe in it.
But
I know
that's what I'm
it's not
saying.
a belief.
But you have a belief that it doesn't exist.
Right. I personally think that this was just the fact that it was presented to us by Al Gore, and
It's not presented to us just by Al Gore.
Right.
Al Gore made a film,
Right.
and he's been called like the first green billionaire.
Yeah.
He's made a shitload of money off of that.
and he flies in his private plane because he's so worried about the emissions. Okay.
That is hilarious.
Yeah,
there's something hilarious about that.
all of the people that are telling us.
But he's a fucking politician.
Right.
You know, there's grossness to all that stuff.
Right. And that's what worries me. So my question is, let's say that it's real.
Okay.
Let's just assume, that's the best way to
Let's
have
say
the
it's
debate.
real.
Let's say it's 100%
Okay.
real. Do you feel that you have found in your research that there is something that human beings can do that would change this all around?
It's possible, yes. One of the things that they're figuring out how to pull carbon out of the atmosphere and even possibly reuse it. There's all sorts of things that people are trying to do. I mean, we had what was the young man who made that device?
Boyan
Slot. He figured out a way to make this device that pulls plastic out of the oceans. They're figuring out a way to. I mean,
That's
there's,
important.
Yeah, there's a lot
Yeah,
of.
well, because plastic just can't over time. But that's what I mean. So when I say that I'm I believe in recycling. I'm not a person that's this is. But the idea that the government is just going to take trillions of dollars because we're in some agreement where we're all agreeing that we should do something is useless. And look, from the stuff. There's obviously a lot of debate here, and as I said, I'm not so. The one thing you always find with me is I'll never pretend to be so educated on something. I'm not going on college campuses talking about global warming. I don't do that.
Right, but why are you saying that you don't think it exists?
I don't know. Maybe because it got
Here
so.
it is.
Maybe because it got so politicized.
Studies into scientific agreement on human-caused global warming, and look at all the studies. It's between 100% and 91% at the lowest. 91% of one of the studies from 2014.
This is the Union of Concerned Scientists.
Yeah, they almost. It's a pretty broad consensus.
Who are they polling? Is it the people that are a part of this .org? That's what I'm asking.
10,306 scientists to confirm over 97% of climate scientists agree, and over 97% of the scientific articles find that global warming is real and largely caused by humans. Right. So my question to you is, if you want to step outside of the scientific consensus, which is vast and involves 10,306 scientists, and just say, I don't believe in it, even if you're right, you don't have enough information to say that.
Right. No,
You might be
but that's why I
correct.
said this is the
But
whole
you're
point.
saying you don't believe
I
it.
don't. Yeah, I would have to have someone sit down and convince me that it was real. I personally don't believe it. That's okay.
But why?
It's good to start
but
at a
here's the
place of
thing.
not believing something.
No, it's not.
You think you should start with believing everything.
No, it's not believe either or. Not believe yes, not believe no.
Yeah.
But don't say you don't believe.
Yeah.
Learn about it.
Yeah.
Learn about it and then have an opinion. But you're stating this opinion without having any real understanding of
Right.
what climate
Well,
science is.
but that's exactly what an opinion is. I'm not going, like I said, if you said that, Candace, you went on to 10,000 college campuses and you said that global warming wasn't real, then we'd have a problem. You and I are just having a conversation.
Yeah, but
Holy guacamole. Again, there's no two words to describe that better than that, because one of the worst things I've ever seen in my entire life. So first, the claim was made by Candace Owens that the disparity is quite large in the scientific community as to whether or not global warming is real and whether it's man-made. Now, we already know that there's a huge consensus among scientists that that global warming is real and that it's caused by humans. Now, the issue also that I have to take here is, and this is something that is important, is that science actually isn't determined by consensus of scientists. It's determined by consensus of data, which is what the scientific method is. So it's irrelevant. Joe's using the wrong argument here, but the original thing presented was that the disparity was lacking and that it was the claim made by Candace Owens was that there's a massive amount of disparity. Now, obviously, that's false, but the idea that you would convince someone that climate change is real by saying that, most scientists, the vast majority of scientists say it's real, is just faulty argumentation, and you should never use that argument, because consensus among scientists is irrelevant to the scientific method. What determines science is the data received through the scientific method. And so it's not a consensus of scientists, it's a consensus of data. And this was explained by Potholer when he explained that, it's relevant as to what the studies say and what the results of the studies are, not what the scientists believe. And this is for many reasons. Obviously, that would assume that all scientists agree based on objective data, which is false because, for example, we see a lot of scientists being bought out by companies like Coca-Cola and obviously the fossil fuel industry. And so they're compromised, and there are very many reasons as to why that just doesn't work. So I want to make that clear. So she's presented with evidence to the contrary of her claim, and her pivoting defense is, but really, like a .com though? Like that means they're making money off this? If that's your argument, you're pretty much taking out every single source that Candace Owens would cite ever, because I don't think there's anything that she would cite that's not a .com. I don't think there's a single one. I honestly really don't think so. But also, it's just faulty argumentation. Again, you should address the things stated in said website. It's not really all that relevant as to whether or not it's a .com or .org. And to my understanding of it, there's nothing that makes it different. If you can set up a .org just like you can set up a .com, if I'm not mistaken, because I've gone through some websites, and that's what it seems like to me. So it seems like to be totally irrelevant, but it's just a pivot when losing. Now, Joe Rogan then proceeds to mock her when she says I don't believe this at all. By the way, take a shot every time she says you'll probably die. So don't do that. I take that back. But so you're just not going to believe facts that are presented to you because you're dumb is the real reason why. I mean, she's just dumb, period. There's no other way to explain that. And the thing also about Candace Owens is she'll say really random stuff. Like, do you hear where she goes, bring up where all the scientists tried saying this and they got shut down? What does that even mean? What is that? Take science? That's the opposite of science. Legitimately, that is the opposite of science. It's the most hilarious, dumb thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And then she makes the worst mistake possible, which exposed her as the dumbest person on planet Earth and the last person we should have in an argument about climate change. She conflates weather with climate. Now, weather and climate are not the same thing. And this is a big meme for anybody who knows anything about climate change. Just because it's snowing at some point during the year doesn't mean that climate change isn't real. Okay, that doesn't mean climate change isn't real. Just because it's cold on some days doesn't mean that doesn't mean that global warming isn't real. That's a dumb argument that doesn't make any sense. And weather and climate are two distinctly different things. So weather is short-term changes, but climate is long-term changes. They're two very different things. So it's not weather change, right? It's climate change, because the long-term trends are changing. And that's what's important to look at, because the scientific data is so important to look at, and it's very articulate and just very specific, I should say. Not articulate, but specific is what I mean. And then she goes, I don't believe in it, in response to why have a belief? Because what Joe Rogan is coming here for, what he's trying to say is, hey, if you're not someone who's educated on the matter, why go into it with a position yes or no? And she goes, oh, well, I don't believe in it. It's like, yeah, that's a belief, though. Your belief is that it's wrong. So while you're not believing that climate change is real, you're saying that you have a belief that it's wrong, that the thing is wrong. So you have a position on the issue of whether or not climate change is real. So you don't even understand basic semantics here. And then the other thing that conservatives love to do is talk about Al Gore or some other I don't even know why they would go after Bill Nye, because it doesn't make sense. Like, Bill Nye is right. He's smart. But Al Gore and people other like that, like where he makes a Hollywood movie and then people use that as like the benchmark check as to whether or not it's coming true, when, as Paul Huller talked about, like, let's look at the scientific literature, the scientific data, and the actual studies and what they actually show. It doesn't make sense to be pointing to Al Gore and pointing to other things like that that are wholly irrelevant to the issue we're talking about here. And the reason they do it is because it's easy. It's something easy for them to say that allows them to dodge the real issues that would be addressing the actual scientific data and the scientific literature. And then she tries making the argument, well, hey, if I was going to college campuses saying I have this position, well, then you got me there. But, I'm just on a podcast that's going to be viewed by over 1 million people. So it's fine. No, that's not fine. You're on a podcast that's going to be viewed by at least 1 million people, if not more. And you're making the statement very boldly that you don't believe it. In fact, your position is so bold that when presented with obvious evidence and data to refute your argumentation, you literally pivot to saying you just don't believe it, despite facts being presented right to your face. So it doesn't make sense. Then a .org is presented, because she previously had an objection to a .com being presented. With a .org, having the same data, she doesn't believe in it. So obviously it proves that the whole .com nonsense was just a total fiasco. And then she thinks that the website pulled itself, like a scientist pulling itself, when it clearly states, where Joe Rogan highlighted the sentence before, it literally states it's citing a study that had polling data. And so basically I wanted to go over this again, because I feel like I've cited this fiasco so many times that I felt like I had to talk about it. So or go over it specifically. So this is why I believe conclusively that Candace Owens is indeed the dumbest conservative right-wing pundit in the game, by 1.5 miles, by the way. It's not close in any way, shape, or form.